Amen.
The message today is called The Call, the fourth and last in the series. Previously we discussed about how God's called us to do everything that Jesus did and more. These things and greater shall you do in my name. That's great. But then last week we talked about the downside of that is that we can also expect to get the same kind of trouble. And I just want to outline that quickly again. He said he was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised and we esteemed him not. We can expect to get this too. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. Chastisement and our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. We can expect all of that.
Oh, yes, it does.
But the big question is not, can we expect it? How do we do it? How can we be in that place? As believers, how can we walk through that? And I would suggest it's even harder than it first looks. You can turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And he says there, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, the word there is actually agape, which is unconditional love. It's unconditional love. You're loved not because of who you are or what you do, you're loved because you're loved. And I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. Just noise. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I can remove mountains and have not agape, I am nothing. So if I don't have love, I'm nothing. Not that I have nothing, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, or agape, it profits me nothing. Charity suffers long and is kind. This is the benchmark that we can measure ourselves against. Never mind measuring other people. That's easy to do, but it's about measuring ourselves, right? Charity suffers long and is kind. Are we patient? Can we take that beating, or do we come to the place where I can't take it anymore? I can't take it. Charity suffers long and is kind. Charity or agape envies not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, badly, in other words, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, thinks no evil. Well, that's novel, isn't it? Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Charity, agape, never fails. So in other words, it's like, okay, you can do stuff, and you might be able to fool yourself, maybe fool other people for a while, but you're not fooling God. You're saying, if it's not driven by the love of God, it doesn't do any good. This brings me back to something that makes me laugh, because I think we've all done it to some extent. It's like, well, God, I'm going to do this for you, and then you can give me this back. God, I'm going to support the veterans, and then I'm expecting you to give me a house. And then it doesn't happen. And it's like, well, I'm angry with God because he didn't do what he said he was going to do. He never said he was going to do it. I didn't know. It's like people like to get God to co-sign these deals all the time. It's like, he doesn't do co-signing, okay? You got to get it straight from him. If you don't, then you're wasting your time. The fact is, so it doesn't matter, even if you could pull this off for some period. If it's not done in the love of God, you still don't get anything for it. So this is not an easy walk. So it still poses the question. I dug a deeper hole. Now, how do we get out? How do you do that? How can you take all of that in the love of God? It's a good question. Now, we can look to Jesus, and the first thing you can say is, well, he was the Son of God. Of course he could do it. But it wasn't easy for him. So how am I going to do it? And the answer comes to us in Luke chapter 7, starting verse 36. You don't have to turn there, or whatever you want. And this is an interesting story. I preached about it not too long ago, but it's completely relevant to answer that question. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with her tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Well, first of all, she wasn't even invited in the house. She just walked right in, which is kind of interesting. She never got thrown out either. And it's interesting because, like, this is luxurious. Now, I hate to say it, but most men don't expect that from their wives. And if they did, well, there could be some trouble. But anyway. But then do the men do the same thing for their wives? That's a different issue as well. Okay, so my wife won't kill me now. So, and when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she's a sinner. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto you. And he said, Master, say on. Now there was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence, and the other 50. Now back then, a pence doesn't sound like much, but it was like a day's wage. So 50 days worth of pay versus 500 days worth of pay. Okay, it's getting up there. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, to wash my feet. They did that back then because, of course, everybody was walking around in sandals, dust, dirt, muck, animal droppings. You needed your feet washed when you walked into somebody's house. But she hath washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. Now, this sounds a nice story, but what do we learn from it? What is interesting is the Pharisee, he thought he was right with God. He's in a good place. He does everything he's supposed to do as a believer. He's a Pharisee. And this woman, she didn't look at herself as being anything at all. But she had a luxurious manifestation of love for God. Why? Like Jesus said, he wasn't forgiving much. Why? Because he couldn't recognize that he did anything bad at all. He was a good person. So he didn't need forgiveness. So he didn't even really think much about it. But this woman, she completely understood she was a sinner.
Amen.
This is, in society today, there's a high sense of not just expectation, but entitlement. I am entitled. I'm entitled to this, that, and the other. Nobody talks about rights, but nobody talks about responsibilities. Everybody talks about rights and what they're entitled to. But this woman came in and she recognized she was entitled to damnation. She was entitled to hell. And that this Jesus forgave her sins. She understood not just who Jesus was, the Son of God. She understood who she was, a sinner. She had no right to even be in the same room with Jesus. And yet she understood that he, because it was Jesus, forgave every one of her sins. Because he was God. Not because she did anything. Not because she didn't do that washing his feet with her tears and her hair because she was forgiven. She didn't do it to get forgiven. She was already forgiven, and she understood that. And because she recognized the depths of her evil and depravity, she could be that luxurious. Now, why is that important? Because I'm just as evil and depraved as that woman.
Amen.
And until it becomes totally clear to me, I can't have that manifestation in my life either.
Amen.
To recognize not just the absolute purity, the absolute righteousness of the God that I serve, but that I'm at the opposite end of that spectrum. In me, in and of myself, without the Spirit of God, I'm completely evil. There's nothing good, there's nothing redeeming about me as a person. If I die outside of Jesus Christ, there's only one place I'm going. And I'll need plenty of suntan lotion. And it won't do. Hey, it's all about recognizing not just the holiness of God, but the evil of who I am. And when I recognize that, then I can understand what Jesus did for me. And when I can understand what Jesus did for me, I can't help but love God and love my neighbor as myself.
Amen.
Because there's nothing else for me. I think of Paul. He says, I'm the least of all the saints. He wore himself out in terms of service. He died gladly as a martyr because he had the revelation. He had the revelation that in his zeal, he was persecuting Jesus and he thought he was serving God. And as soon as he got that revelation, he understood, I'm on the wrong track. He didn't waste any time. He said, well, I don't know. It's too far. I'm too far gone. He can't do anything for me anymore. I just can't go back to that. And so I don't know what to do. And he didn't do that. He said, these are my new marching orders. Let me get with the program. All Jesus said was, go into Damascus. I'll tell you. I'll talk to you. He went into Damascus. 3 days, he fasted and he prayed. And Ananias came to him and said, Jesus told me to come and to pray over you so you get your eyesight back. And he did that. And his eyesight came back. And from that point on, he was dedicated to the gospel of Jesus Christ. The man he so persecuted became his Savior. And he understood. First of all, he repented. And when he recognized that, it was like, there's no sense going back to the spilt milk. Everything I did wrong. I acknowledge that. I repent of that. But now, I'm devoted to serving God. The God that died on the cross for me, that I did not know, that I persecuted, that's the one I serve now. And it's the same for every one of us. When we did not know Jesus, we were his enemy. Why were we his enemy? Well, I didn't have anything against Jesus. Yeah, you had everything against Jesus, but you had no interest in righteousness. But once you accepted him, you got, first of all, the honor of the call. It says in Revelation 3 times, he's made us kings and priests. That's important because priests we can understand, but kings, he's given us dominion, spiritual dominion, with the only one higher than us, God himself. But he's also given us, with that authority, also responsibility to go into the byways, to preach and to teach the word, to be a living sacrifice, to be a living example. He says we are living epistles read of all men. It's not what we say, it's about how we live. The people, is there something in your life that people want to come up and ask you what it is about you? That's the Jesus. That's the Jesus I want to have in my life. That's the Jesus I want to be an example of. And the only way I can get there is by really understanding not just the righteousness of Jesus, it's about my own evil and depravity. When I get there, I can be there. I'm a work in progress. We all are. I'm not looking to you and saying, well, you need to be better. I got to work on me first. But I encourage all of you, we can do better. And why is that important? Because when we do better, we have more peace, we have more joy, we have more fulfillment. And that's my message for today.